Hello, my name is Hannah and I will be presenting the process, themes, and art of Niki de Saint-Phalle. Phalle was born on October 29, 1930 in France, as Catherine Marie Agnès Phalle de Saint-Phalle. Her father was French and her mother was American, and the majority of her childhood was spent in New York City. Her first career was a fashion model at the age of 18, and she appeared in both Vogue and Life magazine. In the early 1950s is when Phalle begins experimenting with painting. By 51, she has her first child, and 52, she moves to Paris with her husband, where he studies music and she studied theater. In 53, Phalle suffers a nervous breakdown and gets hospitalized. And through this nervous breakdown, she discovers painting as a coping mechanism, and she decides to quit acting and become an artist. She moves to Mallorca and finds the work of Antonio Gaudi, and particularly the piece Parc-Gel inspires her to create a sculpture garden herself. In her return to Paris, she becomes inspired by many other artists like Paul Klee, Henri Matisse, Picasso, Jackson Pollock, and she even meets John Tinguely, who she eventually moves in with into an artist colony after the divorce of her husband. Here are a couple of her earlier works. On the left we have the family portrait done in 54, and on the right we have this pink nude and landscape done in 59. And this one is sort of a reinterpretation of ancient imagery. We have a goddess in the foreground holding an instrument amongst this landscape, and already you can see influences from other artists in this piece, such as the splattered background was influenced from Jackson Pollock. In the 60s, Phalle creates shooting paintings, aka tiers, and they would consist of assembled found objects, plaster, wood, and concealed paint containers. And through the process of shooting at these containers, the piece would be created, which in turn would create a performance piece as well, where St. Phalle would even wear different garments representing different roles as a creator for each painting. Each of these pieces offer different commentary based on topics from politics to the threat of nuclear war, and these pieces really helped Phalle pave her way into the Nouveau Realism group as the only woman. Here are a couple of examples of her tiers. On the right we have Pterodactyl over New York done in 62, and on the left we have Kennedy and Khrushchev done in 62 as well. Kennedy and Khrushchev, you have John F. Kennedy and Russian President Nikita Khrushchev in an embrace, and this is a political statement made in the height of the Cold War. Both pieces, there's that unexpected splatter and violence in the shooting and the process of its creation. And by the mid-1960s, Phalle is stepping away from tiers and she begins creating these figurative reliefs. And these reliefs are exploring different confrontational subjects from women, childbirth, dragons, monsters, and brides. Here's one of those reliefs made using an altered method of sculptural assemblage. It's an earlier feminist work, and it's called Crucifixion. We see strange proportions and emphasis on midriff, breast, groin, and hips, which is an exaggerated symbol of womanhood, and this piece in particular combines those stages of womanhood. We have youth and sexualization and maturity and maternity and age. The fact that this is labeled crucifixion and she has no arms puts this figure in a defenseless, weak, and suffering position, which is a stance on womanhood that eventually changes in her later work. Inspired by the pregnancy of her friend, Clarice Rivers, Phalle begins the creation of her nanas, and these nanas were a change in her depiction of women from before, where they were more feeble and suffering and negative, to a much stronger depiction of women where they are energetic and voluptuous and colorful. They are these archetypal depiction of every woman, where every woman is a goddess. The forms don't conform to the ideal female proportions established by old classical Western art. Instead, they are robust, voluptuous, and incredibly energetic, brightly colored, and posed in kinetic stances. Initially, these were made from papier-mâché, wool, found objects, and as they grew in size, they grew in structure, and so materials ranging from polyester to balloons became composite fiberglass reinforced polyester and decorated with this bright colored acrylic polyester paint. Here is an example of one of the Black Nanas named Black Venus, and these in particular were statements of solidarity with the civil rights movement. And they were amongst the first in the Nana series. They were the strong, active, black, and voluptuous figures, and they were all opposed to those old artistic representation of the mild, passive, and white woman. It worked on the idea that all women are goddesses regardless of color. And Saint Phalle just expanded on these Nana figures and created a vast majority of diverse figures. Looking at this next one, Han. This large-scale sculpture is an extension of this audience participation that Phalle established with her previous shooting paintings. It's interactive. Viewers would enter through the groin and exit out, and they would be engulfed in this cathedral-like interior, where it would insinuate the worship of the every women. And this reference to classical architecture, with entrances usually being referred to as a woman's groin, is taken literally by Phalle. And after entering this entrance, the viewers experience an exchange in creation by walking inside and through and out and exiting as a new life. In the 1970s, Phalle gets the chance to create a first permanent architectural project, and she continues in that direction of fantastical architectural pieces and creates large-scale installations such as Golem in Jerusalem, which is a child's park that surrounds the idea of conquering one's fears. She also begins working with the Halligan family in creating reproductions of her work, from large-scale work to smaller editions, where she physically teaches them how to reproduce her work to encapsulate the same exact energy as if it were her own strokes. During this time, she also creates 3 large-scale nanas for permanent site in Hanover, Germany, where they eventually named them Sophie, Charlotte, and Caroline in honor of these historically distinguished women of Hanover, Germany. Saint Phalle gets hospitalized with a serious lung ailment and has to recover in Switzerland, but she meets up with an old friend and discusses the dream of this sculpture garden, and eventually receives a plot of land from the old friend's brothers in Italy to make this dream come true. So here is that grotesque, monstrous children's park statue, Golem. It was originally rejected by the Jerusalem Parks Commissions because they found it too horrifying to have in a children's park. But Phalle was encouraged to make the case of the importance of fear in a safe spot. She is quoted to say, "Scary things are good because they help children conquer their fears." And due to the new presentation of the case, it was approved further on and was incredibly well received by the local children. So in the beginning of the 80s, construction finally begins on this tarot sculpture garden, and the first architectural sculpture is the High Priestess. The garden contains 22 giant architectural sculptures representing the 22 main tarot cards, and she eventually moves into her own piece, the Empress, and it becomes her home and studio. The tarot garden is made up of these monumental structures that represent those 22 main tarot cards, except not for the psychicness and future-telling aspects, but it's more so the life experience and knowledge that is referred to by those cards. And so this entire garden is more of an exploration of the human condition. And it's all constructed from welded steel bars, wired mesh, and sprayed on cement, and then crafted by hand, painted, and brought together by multiple artists. And after about 20 years of construction, it was finally open to the public. But during construction, Saint Phalle lived in her own art piece, the Empress, which also doubled as a home. The Empress is just an enchantingly beautiful structure that is in the form of a sphinx. It's ultimate symbol of the female condition, femininity, and not only is it that, but it functions as a house. It has a working kitchen and a bathroom and a bedroom and a dining room. And it was also utilized as a studio. and you have this reference of a safe space which links it to the safe space of the womb, and the creation of art within a studio links it to life being created by the female figure, and it's all executed in this beautifully whimsical fashion. And the interior is just as breaking, with this mirrored mosaic bouncing light all across the room and illuminating it, even with just 2 windows being at the nipples. In the 80s and 90s, she's spending most of her time at the Tarot Garden, of course, and begins a series of flower vases in the shape of various animals. She also writes and illustrates the book AIDS. You can't catch it holding hands. And by this time, unfortunately, Jean Tinguely dies, and St. Phalle makes her first kinetic sculpture in honor of him because he was a kinetic sculpture artist. She also moves to La Jolla, California, and starts working with mirrors, glass, and stones more than paint. The last project she did before she died was called The Grotto, and that aspect of audience interaction, which was prevalent in her artist philosophy, was also key in this installation. It maintained its original function of a space that was used to cool down and escape the heat. There were 3 rooms that were decorated differently. There was a room that referenced Matisse dance series, and there were mirrors creating the impression of light bouncing around, and it's an incredible space. And it all held aspects that were prevalent throughout St. Phalle's career. And it sort of acted like a catalog of her past works and techniques. And here are my sources. That is the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening to me. All right.